Let me first introduce the members of the head table. At my extreme right, we have Nadia Cigar. Sitting next to her is Andrew McBean. My name is Christopher Chapwanya. This is Marcel Gaskin. Next to Marcel, we have Kumar Ramnath. And sitting at my far left, Luana Falconer. We are supporters of the movement against parking meters. I would just like to start off by reading a very brief statement, after which Marcel will read in detail the press statement. The movement against parking meters would first like to make it very, very clear that as a group, we are not affiliated with any political movement, any political party. MAPM is a people's movement and represents the views of thousands of citizens across the city of Georgetown and the country as a whole, actually. These are citizens of all political persuasions, religious, social, and economic backgrounds who have united under one cause, which is to resist being bullied and exploited through the imposition of a flawed and very questionable parking meter project. I'll now hand it over to Marcel, who will read in detail the press statement. Thank you.
Good afternoon, members of the press. I would just like to read a statement on behalf of the group that we would like to have issued. The Georgetown Parking Meter Project had its genesis in the 1990s when National Parking Systems, NPS, a company headed by Mr. Kamal Push, presented a proposal for the metering of 2,300 parking spaces to the then City Council. At that time, the project did not find favor with the city's administrators. The project resurfaced in 2015, gaining support with the council, and when the city's leadership changed hands in 2016, it was quickly put on the front burner. The new mayor was elected on April 1st, 2016, and by May 13th, a contract between NMC and NPS had been signed. In June 2016, the mayor, Mr. Patricia Chase Green, the town clerk, Mr. Royston King, Councillor Mr. Junior Garrett, and Mr. Oscar Clark visited Mexico at the invitation of NPS and Smart City Solutions, who by that time had been named as a partner in the venture. During this period, city councillors who had not been informed about the purpose of the mayoral team's visit to Mexico demanded to see a copy of the contract. And Mr. Sherrod Duncan, the then deputy mayor, questioned the bona fides of Smart City Solutions, saying that we could find no trace of them online. Upon her return to Georgetown, the mayor at a press conference informed citizens that she had taken a deliberate decision to withhold the contract from scrutiny in order to secure the investment. They stated, among other things, that based on their assessment, there were grounds for the contract to be withdrawn. They cited, among other things, a lack of a socio-economic cost-benefit analysis and non-adherence to government procurement requirements as their main reasons for coming up with this conclusion. Notwithstanding the objections of the Ministry of Finance, the MMC proceeded with the arrangements to implement the project, and by December 2016 had installed a number of meters in the city. The MMC also proceeded to draft new bylaws to accommodate the operation of a metered parking system in Georgetown, putting these before the council for approval on December 13, 2016. Paid parking was scheduled to commence on January 23, 2017, but there was a last-minute hitch when it was discovered just prior to this date that the subject minister had not yet signed off on the bylaws, which is a legal requirement before these can take effect. With the minister's signature hurriedly affixed to the bylaws, Smart City Solutions and the MMC rolled out their project on Tuesday, January 24, 2017. That was 2 weeks ago, and we have witnessed a resolve by the citizens to refrain from utilizing the metered spaces at all costs. The streets within the area designated as a metered zone remain noticeably free of parked vehicles since the meter program has come into effect. MAPM which is the movement against parking meters, believes that this boycott of the metered spaces by the citizens is their spontaneous reaction to a number of issues that, in connection with the system, that appear to be wrong. MAPM believes that there was no feasibility study done on the project prior to its implementation. MAPM believes that there was no socio-economic impact study done prior to the project's implementation. MAPM believes that the procurement regulations of both the MMC and the GOG have been breached. MAPM believes that the requisite due diligence by the MMC on smart city solutions has not been performed. Intuitively, MAPM, along with the rest of us, the citizenry, sense that something is amiss when the mayor refuses to make the contract with SCS public. Above and beyond all of this, MAPM believes that the parking meter fees set by Smart City Solutions and the MMC are exorbitant. This is when you view it in the light of the fact that a significant number of persons live and work in the metered zone and therefore need to park there for 8 hours or more every day of the week. We feel that this situation will be further exacerbated when the program is expanded into its second phase. We have already seen the teachers come out successfully against parking meters outside schools. And by giving in to their demands for an exemption from payment while on the job, MMC and Smart City Solutions have conceded that all-day parking, the fees for all-day parking are beyond the means of the average public servant. We go further than this by saying that for a person of an average take-home salary of about $112,000 a month, the parking fee based on a 9-hour day and a 5-day week represents about 37% of their monthly income, their monthly take-home income. Compare that to Midtown Manhattan, which is probably the most expensive parking zone in the US, where the monthly parking fee is around 13% of the average monthly salary. Elsewhere in the USA, we see figures closer to 5 and 6%. SCS cannot exempt one professional group from payment on economic grounds and ignore other groups of a similar financial status. We believe that because there was no feasibility study done, a whole range of issues have not been addressed. For example, no provision has been made for parking for the disabled. Are these persons expected to trek the relatively long distances to a meter where, if they're in a wheelchair, they can hardly reach to operate the device? Since the commencement of the program, we have seen numerous operational issues that attest to the inexperience and general disorganization of those implementing the parking meter system. We have noted that the few persons who do wish to comply, despite the public being assured of an adequate PR campaign, are still at a loss when trying to pay for parking. We have noted that persons have been booted even though valid tickets have been displayed on their windshields. We have noted that even though VAT has been reduced to 14%, SCS still applies VAT at the old rate of 16%. We have noticed the discourteous, often belligerent nature of the SCS operatives when they go about their business of enforcing the system. We object strongly to the fact that SCS continues to penalize citizens, even though the bylaws that enable them to do so legally have yet to be gazetted, and in fact, according to the Minister of State, are still under review by the Attorney General. We strongly object to VAT being applied to penalties incurred through breaches of SCS's parking rules. It is our understanding that VAT is only applicable to goods and services. We, the supporters of the movement against parking meters, therefore object to the implementation of parking meters in Georgetown on the following grounds. Lack of transparency of the process. Lack of adherence to the public procurement process. Lack of consultation with the people of Guyana. We, the supporters of the movement against parking meters, request that the NMC and the GOG disclose and make public the following documents related to the imposition of parking meters in Georgetown. 1. The feasibility study. 2. The impact study. 3. All reports, minutes, etc. from stakeholders meetings held prior to the implementation of the parking meters. 4. Evidence of the tendering process. In the absence of any of the above, then we, the supporters of the movement against parking meters, request that the NMC and the government of Guyana revoke the current parking meter contract between SCS and NMC. Also, that they implement a transparent process that involves all stakeholders with regard to the introduction of a paid parking system. In the event that the current contract between Smart City Solutions and MNC is revoked and due process with regard to consultations and the tendering of the project is carried out, then we, the supporters of the movement against parking meters, would be amenable to the following. 1. A reduced parking fee that is affordable by all. 2. Special considerations and/or exemptions for certain categories of persons, whether they be residents, businesses, employees, public servants, etc. We, the supporters of the movement against parking meters, are committed to ensuring the adherence to due process by the NMC with regard to the implementation of a paid parking system.
One of the things that I think we need to place on the table first and foremost is that we are not opposed to the idea of paid parking. We are all in agreement with a sustainable city, a sustainable country. I personally use paid parking at the Chedichagan International Airport last Friday. I left my vehicle there when I was out. I came back, I collected it as is. We have no issue with parking as in sustaining the town. The issues we have is that the manner in which this was done, and as was mentioned earlier, I'm not sure that any due consideration was really given to the effects. And just to point out a few of them, if most persons take a look around, even on social media, there are persons posting pictures of what the town actually looks like in its current form. I posted some photos yesterday, and some of my friends internationally actually doubted me and told me that these photos had to have been taken on a Sunday or on a weekend. I had difficulty convincing them that this was taken at 2:30 on a Tuesday afternoon. Now, what does this mean? It's not just that the streets are clear, but it means that there's obviously an impact on commercial activity, less business. And what does less business mean? It means that my sister, brother, cousin, or whoever that may have been working with a particular business, they probably might not have need for them, and they could become redundant based on the reduced need for services because of reduced businesses. Additionally, persons who provide services around Georgetown, I am personally involved in a business that deals with deliveries. And it means that if every single time a delivery guy has to pay his vehicle to deliver your lunch or whatever the package is, it means that this is going to be factored down into the end cost. And this touches on one of the misconceptions that I've gotten over the last couple of days. If I don't own a car, then this whole parking thing is not really my problem. It's everybody's problem because it affects us all directly or indirectly. Another issue I have is that there are lots of persons making a comparative analysis between what goes on in Guyana and what goes on in the first world, most specifically the United States. They talk about parking in New York, of course. But here's the thing, everything has to be taken into consideration. There are options to your private form of transportation when you're living in these places. You have buses that serve every little nook and cranny of New York City. You have trains. So it's a case where persons have options, and it's unfair to make a comparative analysis between what happens there and here without taking all the factors into consideration. There are a few other points that I would probably allow my colleagues to touch on, but we need to take into consideration what impact this is having. It's not just parking and payment. We have to look at how it is that it impacts the entire commercial landscape of Georgetown.
And just to give you a quick example of impact, as we sit here, I just received a message from an individual who owns a coffee shop on King Street. He's saying that he's going to be going out of business soon. No one is going to be parking to pay 50 and plus 8 with VAT $58 to come in and do a copy for $10 or $20. So this thing is affecting people. And for those who believe that this is a class issue, if businesses are not doing business, they will lay off people. And when they lay off people, the economy suffers. When the economy suffers, Guyana suffers.
And when they lay off people, we have no idea what these people are probably going to turn to when they don't have a legal job anymore.
Kamal?
And just to add, I've been speaking to a few business owners, and over the last 2 weeks, we have seen a tremendous drop in sales in business. And if you look around the tongue, you'll see the tongue is clear of traffic and everybody can get around freely. But on the downside, clear of traffic means less traffic for the businesses. And most of the people that are doing their shopping now is not coming into the capital, but going to other places out of the capital to shop. So companies and businesses in the capital is suffering. And these are the companies that pays a lot of rates and taxes, that pays a lot of taxes to the government, and remunerate the right VAT. Now, when this is happening, how can businesses sustain themselves? Businesses are going to go out of business and employment is going to be lost. So the employment that is lost cannot be justified by an additional 50 to 100 persons employed to oversee the parking meter system. Another concern I have is that 20%, 80%, who fixes the shoulder of the road? Obviously, as we've been seeing, it's got to be the city council. And the 80% partner is just putting down meters. My associate spoke about proper transportation system in other developed countries that have parking meters, and I support that. The only public transportation system we have here is the minibuses and the taxis, which is now all we have to depend on. But we need a form of transportation that has to be taken into consideration that people can get around in a cheap manner if we're going to have a parking system, if people are going to stay out of the city. So everything was not studied in its totality. And the thing about it, I do not support negotiating fees with a company that was illegally set up in the first place, a company that was illegally given a contract that did not follow the proper procurement process, right? I support if we to have a proper parking system in Guyana, then we should have it advertised, we should have people put in bids, and we should have it addressed in the proper manner and procured in the proper manner if we decide to sell our public spaces to private companies. My full support will go to implementation by the city hall, who was elected by the people to make proper decision and to look out for the people's interests. In the case of this parking meter system, as we can see from all the reports, the MOF report, and even the bylaws, this was not done. They did not make a proper representation of the constituency.
Luana?
Well, thank you, Chris. I would like to draw attention to the Ministry of Finance report, and firstly to commend Minister Jordan and his team for doing a fair and impartial review. However, we find it incredulous that this report was able to make it past cabinet in its and the contract to go ahead in its current form. And to follow up from where Komal left off, the government of Guyana's procurement laws are very clear. And I'll quote from a section of the procurement law which says tenders and awards must be executed in a manner that is transparent and fair, and that all the processes applied are in compliance with the national procurement policy or legislation. The M and CC are clearly in breach of the Guyana procurement law, so it is our considered view that anything that takes place after that has to be illegal on some level. We have given away our city for 49 years to a company that we know nothing about, and if they find the Ministry of Finance report is to be believed, SCSI reserves the right to establish with or without consent value-added activities not related to meter or parking business, which one can assume that SCSI, a foreign company, can enter into Guyana's economic activities through the back door. This means they can branch off into any area of business outside of parking, but benefit from the concessions that have been given to them under the current contract with the MNCC. We find this unacceptable. Also unacceptable is the studies that were not done. Even though the mayor and the town clerk are confident that these studies were done, so they would have us believe, but they're yet to produce it to us. They could not produce it to the Ministry of Finance. It's stated in the report. So we are very doubtful that it were done. However, if it was done, please produce it so the citizenry can have a good look at it and determine for ourselves that this is the best deal for Guyana. We don't feel that is what we have gotten.
One way or the other on any of these issues. So that does not affect us. What we're saying is that we're not associated with any political party. What we welcome is the support from every single Guyanese to get these parking meters off the road.
But do you view that the call justifies your cause or anything? If AFC's call for the suspect, does it justify your cause?
If it's justified?
If it justifies your cause.
Any group that is calling for this contract to be reviewed, any group that is calling for this is a shady enterprise, and it is sinister, and it goes beyond just the parking meters on the road. There are plans in place to have smart city solutions manage the transport system of this city. It is beyond what most people understand, and the city council in these bylaws, this is a vile document. The city council has purview over council roads in this city, which means that outside of the parking, the metered area, they can clamp you and boot you. So any group, political or not, that is in support of what we're in support of, we welcome that support, of course.
I'd like to pick up on what Chris is saying. Portion of the Ministry of Finance review of the contract, which of course we have not seen. They're referring to Smart City Solutions, and they say Smart City Solutions is a monopolist-only player. In this context, the content statements are clear that SCSI intends to keep it that way for 4 to 9 years, if allowed. Importantly, it seeks absolute right to determine the space, number of meters, location boundaries, etc. We're building value added. Now, I assume that the press corps has copies of the Ministry of Finance's reports. Is that so? Well, I hope you will have after this meeting, certainly.
And we will share copies of that report with you, because the government of Guyana itself recognizes the catastrophe that this parking meter project is. They've listed out in detail. When you read it, you would understand that our call is not anything strange or unusual. The government of Guyana itself has deemed this project a catastrophe. They've indicated that the mayor and city council does not have the capacity to negotiate the contract which they negotiated. That is just scandalous.
And adding to Chris's point earlier about the ridiculous nature of the contract in itself, and it doesn't take any legal specialist or anything. The main ingredient in this contract is state laws. How could this be reflected in 20% of the proceeds being given back to the municipality? An 8-year-old could see that there's something seriously wrong with this.
And if I could just highlight, for those who have not seen the report, certainly the red flag, for example, it's the report reports like exploitation of soil humor. The fees agreed upon are arbitrary, and fines are well above prices charged internationally for parking violations. No provision made for persons living within the vicinity of the parking meters. The 20% being paid to MNCC is inadequate, and we would like to know what the net effect of the 20% is, because we are using our current city constabulary officers to do monitoring and enforcement of these parking meters. So when you take out all the administrative costs and all the PR, the cost for all the PR that the MNCC is spending to fight this movement, what is the net effect of that 20%, right? And up to yesterday in the media, the permanent secretary of Ministry of the Community spoke to the lack of capacity of the MNCC, and this is a serious issue, and this is bigger than the parking meter contract. And the media should take note of that. We don't know the contents of the contract, but having reviewed the Ministry of Finance report and the obscene bylaws, it leaves very little to the imagination exactly what is contained in the contract, which is why it is being kept as a state secret at the moment.
Other questions?
Question to the Singer, then generally, what are the legal implications for the state and for the city should the contract be revoked?
We're calling for the revocation, but we haven't seen the terms of the contract. We have only been given snippets. So we're hearing that there may be a penalty clause where the state may have to, or the city council rather, will have to make good payments on termination, but that's
For 49 years.
for 49
Absolutely.
years. But again, how can we pronounce on something we haven't seen?
And just to add, that is why we're advocating that instead of the city breaking the contract, starve the green monsters. No, don't support the meters, and if you don't support it, SPM, SES will have to follow on their own because they will not be able to financially upkeep themselves. You know, and whatever the terms are, whatever the penalty is, right? If the city don't bring the contract then they will not have to pay. You know, but what we are advocating for is to see a copy of the contract, just not just snippets of it, or say that you can go with. Send us a copy of the contract. And that is what they're scared to do. They're scared to make the contract public. If there was a contract that all the people could have looked at and had no problems with, or groups of people can look at, then they would not have, and it was transparent, they would not have been scared to show it.
But I'd like to take that a little further. Clearly, the Ministry of Finance has seen the contract because they've pronounced on it. Clearly, the government has seen the contract, central government has seen the contract because they would have had to, the minister certainly, Minister Bolkan gave his approval on the bylaws. Presumably, this matter was considered by the government and approval given based on that. Now, we can make assumptions about that based on, let's hope that these assumptions are clear because the minister has affixed his signature to the bylaws. Now, what I fail to understand at this stage, 2 weeks into this project, you have cards being sold with VAT still added. Now, why hasn't this been addressed? Now, you have an issue where VAT is chargeable on goods and services. Now, a card really amounts to a charge. So why is VAT applied in the first place? Those are the questions we're asking. And why is it that those cards are still being sold? Why are they still in circulation? Why hasn't Ministry of Finance or central government acted on it? So, you know, there seems to be some sort of either reluctance to act or a sort of approval by acquiescence, which seems to be going on right now.
Yeah, and further to your concern about the cards, there have been several complaints by persons who are using the cards that the weight is designed there's $36 that continues to remain on each card which you are unable to use. Right, so this in itself, in addition to the illegality of not just the VAT, but the amount of VAT that is being charged, there's an additional almost 10% of this card which is actually not going to be usable. Right, there are so many things wrong. And for the persons in Georgetown who still have not directly felt the impact, there are lots of persons who are seeking refuge away from the immediate epicenter. And if you were to turn attention to the image we have at the top, the yellow area generally represents where it's currently metered. And there are persons who try to find refuge out of that immediate area. Let's just think about when it is that persons are actually placed in a vice grip, figuratively speaking, and there's actually nowhere to park. Then we are actually going to start to see the effects of this. So the issue is, do we sit and wait for this monster to develop to that point? Or do we try to arrest it at this stage when we actually have a greater chance of reaching the ears and maybe hearts of the persons who are the decision makers here?
And I have in front of me here the minutes of a private sector commission of Guyana Limited meeting with the traffic chief. And some of the things that the traffic chief observed that were not, he made the following observation, I'll read. The contractor was unable to identify what was proposed for the Starbuck area with regard to spaces for parking. The space provided for public transportation was inadequate as over 300 buses use the Starbuck area daily. Fines and penalty were not stated in the law and would have to be gazetted through Parliament. No consideration was given to certain persons who will be parking all day. No provision for persons who work and park for 5 days a week. The markings were adequate for small cars only. The cost for public transportation will increase as buses will be required to pay per trip. There was a security threat as people were not sensitized and could become disoriented, which could result in vandalism, protest action, and riots and civil disobedience. And this is what the traffic chief observed, was his observation when he met with the Private Sector Commission on November the 29th, 2016 at 1000 hours.
And to answer your question directly, Dennis, the Ministry of Finance report, and I'll quote for you, the team has concluded that subject to legal implications, there are grounds for the contract to be withdrawn, and two, the related pecuniary damages assessed and paid subject to M&CC producing a feasibility study that gives the national government a clear picture of the demand analysis, the finance analysis, socio-economic cost-benefit analysis, a risk analysis, technological alternatives, and production plan, human resources, local plan, and an implementation plan. So I think it's very clear that there is an out. Many breaches occurred.
Just to pick up quickly on what Luana said, the contract, there are grounds for that contract to be scrapped. This is again the government of Guyana speaking, not the movement against parking meters.
Yeah.
Government procurement requirements may have been violated in that the tender was not advertised and bids reviewed for acceptance based on certain criteria, and as such justifies a revoking of the contract by government and a retendering. A history of the contractor should be provided to City Hall. That therefore means that the time the government of Guyana reviewed this, they had no history of this contractor. And finally, on prices, the government of Guyana once again said that the prices appear outlandish since it is apparent that no feasibility study was done in order to determine break-even and reasonable profit positions. This is the GOG speaking about the contract that led to this catastrophe that we're now in.
And I'll pick up from there, Chris, if you don't mind. The contract gives SCS the right to establish without consent or constraint value-added activities not related to the meter or parking business. This suggests intent of a foreign company to enter into the economic activities of the country via a backdoor. How can central government allow this to continue taking a hands-off approach? And that is the message we have gotten from the subject minister, that central government is not prepared to intervene at this stage. Then we got another message, which is that the AFC neither disagrees or agrees with the concept of parking meters and its implementation. Where does that leave the citizens of Guyana?
Any more questions? Dennis?
Why, if you're pointing to several also illegalities with respect to the project, hasn't legal action been taken to stop it?
Legal action is going to be taken. These things don't happen overnight. There are several entities that are pursuing action through different attorneys, and in time those matters will be raised. Not of the private entities, but we are pursuing our own channels for legal recourse. Right now, as we speak.
In progress.
It's in the process.
Anything file counsel?
No, not as yet.
How soon?
I can't give you a time.
But your critics also may see why the noise now, why the protest. You had so many months ahead of the actual commencement of your parking, but we saw that there were action. How would you respond?
There's a very straightforward response. No one knew how this was all going to roll out. What we've seen from beginning to this point is absolute confusion. Now, you have the day before this project is to be rolled out, you hear that it's delayed because the bylaws have to be signed off by the minister. There's a requirement under the Municipal and District Council Act that says that the bylaws should be submitted to the minister for approval. At least 14 days before application for approval is made, notice of intention shall be published. Was any of that ever done? We are not aware that that's been done. So there's no evidence that the procedure required to make these bylaws legally enforceable were ever adhered to. Secondly, and more importantly, we could not know what was contained in the bylaws until they became public. And it was only when they became public that we understood the extent to which this project will affect businesses and people who are users of the city. And residents, of course.
Yeah. To respond directly to your question on why the noise now, there are quite a few developments that have not come to the fore until the actual implementation. I have videos in my phone with persons who would have paid for parking, which expires in one case at 14 hours 38, and at 1 minute after 2 in the afternoon, 37 minutes in lieu of that time, these persons were actually being... There are some things that would have developed after the implementation that we were in no position to pronounce on because it had not yet come into existence. And these things going along, fueled with the illegality of it in the first place, are what would have added momentum to this movement and justified our call for this to be scrapped. Can't put it any other nicer.
With each passing day, we've seen the average person experiencing all sorts of chaos and confusion. We hear that the traffic wardens are being paid a commission to clamp vehicles. We hear of stories where people have gone over their time by a minute or so. We hear and they're being clamped. We hear stories of people who are walking to the parking meters to insert their tickets to get...
Not hearing this video evidence that I have on my phone. This is not hearsay. I actually have a video here which I'm willing to show to persons with a guy who held his meter in front of the guys, clamping his vehicle, and he held it up in front of the camera and showed that he had 37 minutes remaining in the parking. So since these guys are getting an incentive for each clamp, they're going about this in an indiscriminate manner. This is just about getting the money at the end of the day.
And being clamped is no walk in the park. A speeding ticket is $7,500. When you're clamped, booted, towed, and impounded, a minimum of $27,000 plus VAT immediately kicks in. And thereafter, it's about $2,500 per day if you're in that facility, if your vehicle is there. And if you, I'm told $7,000 per day thereafter. And if you fail to retrieve that vehicle, I think within 90 days, your vehicle is sold, auctioned.
To recover,
sold.
Whatever.
And they don't need your permission to do that. They'll just sell it and inform you after the fact.
And
But even if at the point where you learn your vehicle is being auctioned, you step in, you then have to pay the costs that have accrued, but also the cost of advertising for the auction, anything involved in actually renting the space for the auction, anything related to the auction. So this is outrageous.
No one has really considered what the impact of this is on the small man, and there's another misconception that is being widely circulated, especially on the social media. Persons are coming up with this not very smart logic, that if you have a car, you could afford to pay for parking. If you own a car, it means you could pay for parking and you should have considered all the associated costs. Now, me driving a car does not necessarily serve as an indication of having additional disposable income. Me having a car means that I could be paying the bank $60,000 to $70,000 at the end of the month. Me having a car means that I have to pay for comprehensive insurance. Me having a car means that I have to buy fuel. Me having a car means that I have to buy tires. So this whole misnomer about if you have a car you could pay it, it's really tantamount to a lack of a realistic analysis of this whole parking arrangement.
I just want to say something.
Sure.
I want to say something with regard to a term that you used in your question, which was critics of the movement, right? If you're critical of our movement, you can ask us why we only now started. You can question who we are affiliated with, whether we're political or apolitical. You can question our status in society, or whether we're high class or low class or whatever. But you know, it really and truly, if you're a critic of us, it means that you are putting money in the meter every day, right? And if you work in the city, it means that you're putting $40,000 a month in the meter every day, right? If you work in the city or you live in the city. So it's not just enough to ask us why now or why are you against it or what are your motives or all that. You got to actually go and put the money in the meter, right? And I don't see too many people putting money in the meter. A lot of people say they're critics, but they're not putting their money where their mouth is. If you're supportive of the meter, you will put your money in it. right? I don't see too many of those people.
So Dennis was
Mr.
going to ask a
Chabral,
question.
there's another element of this, which was we were given snippets of information. Were we told the cost of all the fees associated with immobilizing, towing, storing the vehicles? Were we told that VAT would be charged on those fees? Did we understand that in a metered area, if you park outside of a metered space, that you're liable to be, your vehicle is liable to be immobilized and towed? The implementation of this project. This is only now being discovered. I think those are the things that caused us to feel that this project simply is something that the city can do without, and we need to go back to the drawing board.
Dennis?
You had another question, Dennis?
Yes, I wanted to know if at the bare minimum that the government and the city and smart city solutions were to decide on a vast reduction or a significant reduction of all of the fees, whether that would be enough to assuage your concerns.
Not at all.
No.
Not at all. There are other issues. We've been speaking about them all afternoon. Lack of tendering, adherence to the tender process, lack of consultation, lack of
Due diligence.
due diligence on the company, lack of a social impact assessment. When you do all those things, right, and then come back with a proper fee, maybe.
And the thing about what we support is a parking system. And metering is just part of a parking system. And what we have is a parking meter arrangement that was illegally done, as I call it. Right? So we cannot support and negotiate with somebody that is illegally put in there, or a contract that is illegal. In Guyana, all the talk for the last few years is transparency, transparency, accountability, accountability. Let us have that. Let us see that. That is what we want. Accountability, transparency.
And on the issue of the impact, the environment, the economic impact of this, have we really taken into consideration that the persons who are paying prime taxes to operate in Georgetown's main epicenter are the ones who are actually being starved of business, and persons, including myself, are now seeking alternative shopping options outside of the city? So is it really fair that the persons in the main epicenter are paying more money to occupy this area to do business, when persons are now being forced to leave that area and find alternative places to shop? Has anyone stopped to consider that?
The Ministry of Finance report states clearly also that the business growth will decline. That will be the impact.
It has begun to decline already.
It is. It's happening.
But the reality is, an elderly person going to collect their pension has to pay for parking now. You stop to just run into ATM to get some money out, you have to pay parking. You stop to go to coffee wash to pay for the cost dollar by minimum $58. That's the reality. So, you know, those who are supporting this parking, they really need to consider what the real impact is.
But
Okay.
there's something more fundamental and overarching here. You have a series of rules contained in the bylaws that have now, as I keep using this word, foisted on us. We have to follow these rules. These govern the actions of the citizens as well as the people who are policing the citizens. But I want you to consider for a moment, if these rules are illegal, then aren't you really fundamentally impacting on a constitutional right, which is the protection of your property, and which deprivation without compensation really is quite a fundamental breach. I'm putting this out to the press to consider.
And also be aware that from what we gather, Smart City and the MNCC or the MNCC would not be held liable for any damages to your vehicle while it is in their custody. So if they break, crack your rims, damage your bumper, whatever the case is, that is your problem. So you have to understand that it is all of our problem. Any other questions?
Insurance, let me just say insurance will not cover that because more than likely they say it's an incident and not an accident. So you're on your own if your vehicle gets damaged.
Martin, you make right for this. On the legality of the bylaws, right? Let's say they're illegal. Persons would have already paid penalties. Could there be a case made against the company to refund these interest for the money that was paid since 2 weeks ago?
They will have to take.
Bullied is the word.
They can take legal action. But of course, that's a lot of pressure on the average person to go retain a lawyer to pursue recovery of their monies or any damage that has occurred. But that's really the only option available.
Okay, if they are,
Is there a legal framework to compel city laws, the Guyana city to disclose the contract?
I think I'm not aware of any. There is one option that I don't think anyone has considered so far, which is to approach the Commission of Information under the Access to Information Act to seek a copy through those means. And that's something that we're going to be exploring.
and I think greater than the legal action that could potentially be taken is that we implore the government of the day to look closely into this. And as an administration that rode on the values of transparency and accountability, we expect that ultimately the interests of the people will trump that of Smart City and of the MNCC. So while we understand and acknowledge that the administration would like these local organs to operate autonomously, we believe that the government has a responsibility ultimately to the people before anyone else, any entity, any agency. And since the government's report is damning of this project, we expect and hope that government would find it fit to step in.
In addition to that, by virtue of the fact that the government has granted many concessions to SCS, that gives them equity. And when you have equity, you have a say. I don't know what would stop the government from taking serious action against this contract and the MNCC.
Okay, if there are no other questions, I would just like to make an announcement that the next protest action is planned for tomorrow at 12 p.m. in front of City Hall. While many of you will be there covering it for your media houses, we implore and urge you to have your friends, family, and relatives come out. That we believe that the best and strongest message that we could send is by having numbers out there on the street. So I'd like to use this opportunity to thank you once again, and we fully look forward to your continued support. Thank you.